Why is shame such a powerful emotion? How does it affect us mentally, physically, emotionally? I'm Nadia Davis. I'm a mom, author, attorney, and Kundalini yoga teacher who has experienced public shaming that brought me to my knees. On this podcast, I'm going to tell you how I'm living the work taking shame out of the shadows. I'll give you real-life advice and skills to take away with you throughout your day. You'll hear from powerful guests who have overcome trauma and emerged stronger than ever. You too can ban the shame within and around you. Join me. You are not alone. Welcome, everyone. How are you? This is Home is Within You, where we drag shame out of the shadows. Please listen to this quote. We only allow ourselves what we believe we deserve on a subconscious level. You can change what you believe and create the life of your dreams. Change your mind, change your life. We only allow into our lives what we believe we deserve. Arlina Allen. Arlina is our guest today, and I'm like a little bit nervous. I don't know why, but I think it's because she offers so much wisdom and insight, and I want to get into the deeper story of Arlina and how she got to a place of what will be 30 years of sobriety and being a certified recovery coach, a certified hypnotist, and founder of the Sober Life School, host of the award-winning recovery podcast, the One Day at a Time recovery podcast, with over 300 episodes. She helps busy women, and I believe also men, quit drinking and create a life they love. She has been sober since April 23rd, 1994. Happily married for 25 years, she is the mother of two amazing young adult men and mama to Teddy, the family English bulldog. Now, I'm reading her bio. I want to get beyond the facts. I want to dive into Arlina Allen's heart and her story about how shame showed up early in childhood and how that affected her into early adulthood and then into adulthood, and how she found the will somewhere in her heart through her spirit to realize this feeling that I'm having is not right. I'm going to reach out for help. There's that turning point in recovery where it has to start within ourselves. And my book, Home is Within You, talks about that journey personally. But here on this podcast, I'm hoping that by having others describe the isolation, describe the shame, it can ban others' shame and realize that they are not alone in that feeling, and we can together find the courage to pierce that bubble and reach out for help. After that point, there's a lot out there to turn to, including Arlina's Sober Life School, including 12-Step Recovery, including so many support groups that are out there. But it always seems that this bubble of shame and isolation, this indescribable feeling, is the hardest part to get past. And so we are going to get to all the work and beautiful things that she's offering everybody. But first, I want to ask you, Arlina, well, first of all, welcome, and thank you for being here. Arlina interviewed me on her podcast, and so what, a year later, to be interviewing her is a total blessing and honor. And I think my nerves are up just because it speaks so much to the power of transformation and the challenge of trying to put that into words for other people. And so I want to ask you, first of all, when you think of your little girl, the little girl in you, and how you began to hold her on your journey of recovery, how would you describe her?
Oh gosh, that is such a great question. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I mean, your presence has, I just got to tell you, your presence has such depth and weight. It's such an honor to spend time with you today. Um, and what an insightful question. It took me a long time really to connect with that little girl that is inside me. I had sort of put her away somewhere, and it wasn't until I got into recovery that I was introduced to this idea that that there was like an inner child still within me that needed my attention and love and support. And it's been a process to sort of find her and connect with her. And, I did something called internal family systems that has been super helpful because as it turns out, there were like all these little phases of
Parts.
me that, yeah, these little parts that got like frozen in time, and so now I have tools that I can go back and really connect with myself during those younger years and periods of time that got locked away, and sort of bring those parts home, right? Like that's part of
Right,
the process, is to bring it home and keep her safe. So it's a practice. And
right.
yeah.
So your childhood, describe like that initial structure of how you related to the world, and how the emotion of shame that I now know is a secret belief we are defective. For me personally, it was like every feeling that I had that was, everything I was afraid of, any just confusion, any, anything that was kind of going on around me and triggering feelings within me for one reason or another. Feelings weren't supposed to be. And that was kind of the beginning of how we talk about in a spiritual path, our ego mind is separating us from our true self. And so I'm really passionate about that role of this feeling of defectiveness and shame and dragging it out. Did you begin to have those feelings, and can you describe them as a child so that listeners can feel like a bridge to connecting to that initial separation when they were young?
Yeah. For me, it happened very young. By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just noticing my volume looks really low. Are you hearing me okay?
Now, okay.
Yeah, so when I was little, I grew up in a household where it wasn't that there was only like the happy feelings were allowed, right?
You're right.
Feelings of, I was raised in the church, and my mom was a very positive person, but it seemed like only the happy stuff was acceptable. Like anytime I had negative feelings, it was like my mom really didn't know what to do with that. I always had like really big feelings growing up, but there were a couple of things that happened to me when I was really young that really started that as like self abandonment.
Right.
I had been sexually abused by a neighbor starting at the age of 5. It was like another neighbor child that was older. And
Mm,
then my parents also divorced when I was about 7. And I think the combination of kind of growing up thinking like everything's supposed to be fine, like not dealing with any kind of negativity, like not having any personal boundaries, just really did something to my self-esteem. I began to feel like I was like bad from a very young age
Right.
and really struggled to find any kind of self-worth out. I found my self-worth through like achievement or people pleasing.
Ditto. So if you could put a title on your psyche's core belief that was created at that age, if you could summarize like three. I have a series here and it's called the Core Wound series.
Mhm.
And for me personally, it helped to, with writing the book, and now you're describing your story, to kind of generalize, okay, these experiences and the way my mind is working created these core beliefs that are the basis of triggers today. So one is fear of abandonment, a sense of separation, a belief that love is earned versus innate. And if you could kind of summarize, if you were painting a picture of you as a little girl and these, quotes with the thought in your head that kind of colored the rest of your youth, what would you say they are?
Yeah, I definitely relate to those core childhood wounds. And I think the overarching one was not lovable. And it was like a two-sided coin. It was either because I was too much or because I was not enough,
Mm,
right? Like my feelings were too much, um, myself was too much, or if I tried to seek love, approval, nurturing, it was just not good enough, like not good enough to receive the attention that I was craving.
right,
Which was all like a sense of underneath was like unworthiness, like
right,
not worthy of receiving. And that echoes into my adult life, even though I have a lot of recovery, those are still
sure,
sort of the ideas that I continue to, you know, I don't want to say work against, but it's almost like work towards in the sense that,
awareness.
yeah, like, I mean, I wouldn't expect to go to the gym once and stay in shape forever, right? Like I have like this default that I come back to. So my work, my practice is around addressing ways like worthiness is, for me, has been about my innate character traits, like
Hmm.
loving or kind or patient or, fun or playful, like the inherent traits that I have, as opposed to confidence, which is built on achievement,
I see.
right? But I'm so comfortable in the doing. It is really a practice for me to come back to just accepting and being at peace with the positive character traits. And of course, there's some character challenges.
Sure.
But,
So looking back, and please say anything, please share more about your childhood that you wish to, because that was some traumatic stuff that you went through. What helped me, and I'm wondering if this helped you, is, did you at any point realize that these beliefs and thoughts were attacks, kind of were, and today interfere with that connection to your true self? Were you able to kind of separate from it? But how, so I want to get to that. If you could describe, like, in the youth with those beliefs, that sense of unworthiness and unlovability, you said it drove you to high achieving, to be a perfectionist, and then how did those beliefs just kind of chisel into your head as you entered the world?
Yeah, what's so funny is most of it was just unconscious. Like
Right.
I didn't know what I was doing. Like I just thought that this is how the world was. I didn't notice. Like I knew I had hated myself. Like I had always wanted to be somebody else growing up. And it's so interesting because
Interesting.
yeah, I just wanted to be anybody else but me. So I was always
See
trying
how
to,
powerful that is?
yeah,
That's shame.
that shame. Yeah, because it wasn't that I did something wrong. It was that I am wrong, right? Like
Right.
that I was wrong. And I didn't even realize, I didn't know that's what was happening. I just hated who I was.
It
Um,
just is. It's this existence, this way of living, but when we're unaware that our mind is creating those thoughts and beliefs, that's what feeds the
yes.
disease and mental health struggles and so much alcoholism and addiction. But you so describe it a little more because we're going to drag that out
Yeah.
so anyone out there that's listening can know they're not alone in this feeling, because to compare that darkness and isolation and feeling of defectiveness to the work you're doing today is the journey. So try for a few minutes to just to dive into that, the the darkness that your mind created, so that others know they're not alone in that dark place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think looking back, I was in such a dark place. I hated who I was. And I think, I grew up with a lot of religion in the sense of these messages that were repeated over and over again, that I was a sinner, that I was bad, that I needed to be forgiven, that I needed, that I got the message I was inherently broken,
Okay.
coupled with the experiences of the things that were happening to me,
Hmm.
and this message of I need to repent, I need to be sorry, these messages were all coming together in a way that just, I believed that there was something really wrong. I believed that I was broken. And I just remember always asking God to fix me. And asking God to fix me underneath all that was this idea that I was broken, I was bad. And I tried and tried and tried to be good, and whatever that means. I tried so hard and for so long that eventually, like, I just gave up. I was like, there is no winning this. I used to joke around. This used to be funny to me that I would tell people, I used that I tried to be good for so long and I couldn't be, that
Hmm.
I decided if I couldn't be good, I was going to be good at being bad.
Hmm.
Right? There was still this sense that I wanted to be good at something, even if it was being quote unquote bad. Right? There was no sense of empathy or compassion for the things that I had experienced, because in my mind, it was all my
For
fault.
yourself, for yourself, there wasn't.
Right. Yeah. There was nothing that was going to happen that was going to heal me, because I had, like, God was this all powerful thing, and
Hmm.
God wasn't fixing me because I was still behaving in ways that were, deemed bad.
Hmm.
And I just gave up. Like, I was just felt so powerless to
So
be
into
back.
like your teenage years, um, did that intensity of a feeling of unworthiness and defectiveness lead to, certain ways you were treating yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I had my first drink of alcohol by the time I was 10. I was like 9 or 10 before I had when I had my first, like, when I got drunk for the first time,
Mm,
right? And I didn't know it then, but I was looking to escape,
right.
right? I needed relief from these feelings. And I'll never forget that first drink, because there was like this. My mom had gone out to dinner. My sister and I have an older sister. She and I were left home alone. And I thought it would be a great idea to drink some of the booze. It was like in a dusty old bottle. I had never seen my parents drink. So it wasn't
Hmm.
like learned behavior, but I decided to drink this booze. And I remember it burning my lips. There was like an excitement to, like, of doing something naughty, right? And
Hmm.
then, that first drink that burnt my lips and all the way down till it hit
Hmm.
bottom. And then what happened was this warmth spread through my whole body. And suddenly, all the self consciousness, the feelings of being bad was lifted, and all I felt was good. And I didn't realize how bad I felt until I felt really good. It was like that relief.
Wow.
And the juxtaposition of those two feelings was so intense. Like the stark contrast of those two feelings were so intense that it was like burned into my psyche forever. That
And
that is
see how
what
the
I'm on.
disease just latches on, and so your mind had created this foundation of unworthiness and defectiveness. Unbeknownst to you, you were living life with that belief, and then the exact opposite of the relief that you felt with a drink quelled that pain and that running to stand still. So if I say to you that in those moments you were born and are and still exist in a true self that has a core innocence that is whole, divine, and complete, like in that kind of moment where you're in the dark, how graspable is a statement like that, right? And no drink that you've taken since that first one has changed that truth. So the way you've described where you were versus the only truth that matters is like we're all infinite beings, whole, divine, and complete, is such a great example of the power of our mind. And so in that subconscious belief that carried you through then into adulthood and your disease, and how long did your disease last? Where did it take you? And how did you begin to lift the layers?
Yeah, so I had my last drink of alcohol on my 25th birthday and continued to smoke weed for another 5 months. So
So you drank for 15 years?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't become a daily drinker at 10, but I started heavily drinking about 14. Like I remember drinking before school in junior high sometimes, right? And
And the disease being driven by this core feeling of defectiveness
yeah, I mean,
and
when
unworthiness.
you talk about like this, the essence of my soul being perfect and untouched by, like, none of that was
Right,
accessible to me for a very long time.
right.
You know, because and it was sort of a it was a kind of a head trip because I was going to church and sort of it was like being on the other side of the glass of a candy store. It's like I can see it and I'm so close to it and I can kind of smell it and feel it. You know, I'd have these spiritual experiences at church where I knew to my core that God loved me. Um, but at the same time, I was living with this self hatred and seeking outside myself for redemption. And it was a really tough way to live. I sort of had this idea that my spirit was eternal and untouchable and pure, but I just I couldn't feel it. Do you know what I mean? Like I
Right.
couldn't grasp it until, my drinking, it lasted, till I was in my mid 20s and it started to heal once I got sober. But, it took me a 2 year period of wrestling. It was like a 2 year period of trying to moderate my drinking and using before I
Mhm.
was able to come to the conclusion that I had to let it go. Like it was killing, like the thing that was saving me turned out to be the thing that was like killing me. My savior turned into my executioner. And I finally had to let it go because it was literally killing me.
So you've expressed how fear and judgment-based thoughts were just controlling everything, and those can lead to shame, and and an example of how a belief you are defective, shame, was separating you from an outside higher power source, let alone the one within you. But it was an unconscious way of living, right? So then you said you tried to moderate, and were there beginnings of, okay, I can have a different understanding of my existence? When did that begin?
You know what's funny is that I had always been like a little worker bee. Like I had jobs since I was like, babysitting at like 13 and jobs, a paper route. Like I always been a worker bee. So I had like this sense of ambition inside me, and I wasn't able to like get what I needed. Um, and I came across a Tony Robbins
Yeah.
commercial, and it was the first time I was introduced to this idea that if I changed my mind, I could change my life. That it was my belief system that needed some editing, right?
Hmm.
Some adjusting. But I was still drinking. I was probably, I don't know, in my early 20s, 22, 23 years old when I was introduced to this idea. And it was like the seed was planted and
Right.
it just grew over time. And I
So
think,
at that point, you're like, okay, well, my thoughts, I'm not saying literally you thought this, but it was kind of like, oh, those are my thoughts. They aren't me. And those are my thoughts. I can change them, because that's a real key, pivotal changing point versus you're in your thoughts.
yeah, and it was introduced to me in the context or within the framework of a belief system,
Okay.
right? And so that's kind of, like they say you meet people where they're at. And I was just sort of clueless. I was so clueless. But this idea of my subconscious belief system,
I
I was
see.
like, wow, that was really powerful for me. And then that sort of led me down the road to eventually, using tools like meditation,
Hmm.
where I was introduced to the idea that like I am not my thoughts.
Right.
So that was like a little journey from even being introduced to the idea that I had a subconscious mind and that's where all my thoughts and beliefs resided, right?
Right.
And then to, like the next step was to acknowledge, to understand how like my mind was working, that I'm not my thoughts. Like someone told
Exactly.
me one time, oh, it's your brain's job to think, right? And so it's going to
Yeah.
do all this stuff. And so we're sort of like put a buffer between me as my spirit and my mind,
Exactly.
and that I
That's the
could.
home. That's the home in our body with our mind, when
Yeah,
realizing we are not our thoughts. And then on the other end, we have this our true self, our spirit, and a higher power we can connect to.
yeah,
So did you start to feel somewhat, calmer and safer and happier, eh, with that basic understanding and foundation? I am not my thoughts. Did it kind of quell some of that? I call it a running to standstill mode. Like go, 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 do, 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 do. Did just that core understanding of existence start changing the way you were approaching
yeah.
everything?
I'm sure it did. Like it has taken. It's like an idea that grows over time. Like,
Right.
and and sometimes the subtle shifts in perspective are not noticeable to me, but it's like those tiny little shifts as they build. Like it's like the James Clear thing about being 1% better. It's like just taking one step closer to home, which is inside, right? One step closer, one step closer. And after a while, it's like you look back and you're like, wow, I've come so far, right?
And you began with meditation and breath?
No, I sort of addressed sort of like the mental part first. I was not safe in my body. I was not safe in my heart. So I started where I was comfortable, which was the thinking and the learning, right? So once I found Tony Robbins and I was introduced, and I was an avid Oprah watcher. So she introduced me to all these other teachers like Marianne Williamson and
So you were doing this on your own time?
yeah, this is all
Like
just part
like
of
not in a treatment? Did you go to treatment? Does
I
your story include
did.
treatment, jail, or hospitalizations?
No, none
Okay.
of that. I just, um, before I got sober, it was like the Tony Robbins and then Oprah and all the teachers that I was being exposed to that way. And
While you were moderate, you were trying to
I was
moderate your
moderating.
drinking.
What I
I
was
see.
trying to do was think my way into right living.
I
But
get
it
it.
wasn't, and then I just ran it for as long as I could. I crashed and burned, and I was like, I had a friend that was like, "You should go to AA." I was in a sales position. One of my clients was like, "Hey, you know what? I go to AA. You should come and do the whole
So
12."
it had this kind of self-will angle. I'm going to cure myself. I'm going to change the way I think. And was that somewhat like a denial or of the drinking problem? Um, was there still a shame theme that was coming up to get to a point of, okay, I can't drink at all. This is negatively affecting my life. Like, describe that transition into going, I can't drink. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, that was huge. Yeah, I just had to, I don't know if it was self will so much as I just didn't know any other way because I had tried to rely on God and wasn't working for me. Right. So I didn't know that there was another way. But I just knew that I was trying to think my way into right living. I thought if I could understand why I was the way I was, like mentally, I thought it was all psychology.
Right.
I needed to heal my mind, right? And so, but I couldn't
I
give
was
up
the
the drink.
same.
Yeah,
And I could, you probably, just knowing your personality and the high achiever you are, you were like trying to figure it out. And
Figure It Out was my theme song. Like
yeah.
that's exactly what that was. It's like, yeah, there's a reason that Figure It Out is not a slogan.
So what happened where you said, okay, I'm not going to, I'm going to try to not drink anymore. And I mean, what was that pivotal turning point? And then,
Man,
and what resources did you use and what roadblocks came your way?
yeah, that's
Because
a
I
lot.
know that,
That's a lot.
yeah, I know, and I want you to get to it and let's hear it.
You'll have to steer me back if I forget. But I had what I would on my 25th birthday, I was dating this guy and I thought he was my ideal and I was losing that relationship because of my drinking. And on my 25th birthday, I got so drunk that night and just caused a scene, made an ass of myself. I embarrassed him. It was gross. It was, and the next morning, and this is at the end of a series of like that was like not an uncommon occurrence.
Hmm.
And but there was something about that night that I woke up the next morning and I was like, I am never going to drink again. And I haven't. But I took a big bong hit because I didn't have any other way of managing my emotions. And I suffered for like 5 months without any kind of support. I had no resources, no insurance. I didn't even really know about rehab. I thought rehab was for other people. I don't know why I never considered it. But that's when someone from work was like, one of my clients was like, "Hey, you should come to this meeting." And I was just so broken down and tired.
What was your work at the time?
I was working as a sales rep for a transportation company.
Okay.
And so my clients, they were all men. They were all because I was working for a shipping company. I was dealing with men in shipping and receiving. And two of my clients were actually in the program, and they were sort of exposing me to ideas about 12 steps and recovery and things like that. So that
Hmm.
when I just couldn't take it anymore, they were like, "Yeah, let's go to a meeting." And then when I went to that very first 12-step meeting, and they said there was someone there that said, "Welcome home." They had it written on a chalkboard. I was like, I felt to my core that I was home. They were saying things and speaking, and like they were saying the things I was feeling but didn't have
Hmm.
words for. And they were sharing so openly, and they were so kind and accepting and loving. And these were people that looked nice, that they were telling stories about who they were. And it was hard for me to reconcile the stories with what I was seeing in front of me.
Right.
But that's the same person. It was wild. It was wild. And that's really how it started. And I was just like, it was like a life raft. It was like, oh my gosh, this is where I belong. And I knew it to my core.
So what do you think it quelled in you that was blocking you from the behavioral change that you describe? Um, what did it just take out of the picture that opened another path?
Yeah, it was that I wasn't alone. Right. And and they gave me, I felt connected and I
Okay.
didn't feel so alone. And they
Hmm.
gave me hope. Like I saw these beautiful women that were driving nice cars. They were dressed well. They were smart and articulate, and their message carried depth and weight. And I was like, that's what I want. And they would tell me, like, I felt like I used to feel like you feel now. And
So
there's
you
hope.
started to believe you deserved love and sobriety into your life.
I
You
felt like
started
it
to
was
believe.
possible. I don't know if I was ready. I didn't feel like I deserved it, but I was hoping that I could get it.
So that was 25 years ago?
Yeah.
30,
Well, that was almost 30 years ago.
almost 30 years ago. And so how did it stick in you, and how did you get inspired to create the One Day at a Time podcast? How did you get from walking in the room that day to now having, a reinvention course, an online group where people can connect anonymously, and the podcast? What was that?
Yeah. So I dove in. I'm not really a half measures kind of girl. I'm kind of
Hmm.
all or nothing. And I
All
was
right.
all in. So I did everything they told me to do. And it's, from there to here was literally one day at a time, right? Which is why I named the podcast One Day
All
at a
right.
Time, because it was literally one day at a time. And I did everything I'm an action taker, right? I did all that. Like the men that introduced me to the program quickly turned me over to the women. And they were
Hmm.
like, you need to find somebody who's been through it before, who has what you want, and just do everything she tells you to do, basically. And I was so desperate to be sober. I did everything. And so that's when all the practices like meditation, self examination, service, connecting with spirituality in a way that made sense to me, like it needed to make sense. And I got to reinvent really my whole understanding of what God means. Like I was
Hmm.
told very early on that if you have a problem with God, you probably have a problem with somebody else's God. And that was true.
Right.
Right. And so this gal that I met, she's like, it has to be something that makes sense to you. And that's where I started. And it has just grown over time. And yeah, I've just been an absolute, self help junkie. Like actually started a second podcast called the Self Help Junkie Podcast, because once I got
Mhm.
sober and put down the drink and the drugs, then it became a process of
So, and you used
healing.
12-step recovery,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And then, okay, you used 12-step recovery and all the other modalities. You did meditation and things of that sort. And
Lots of
so,
therapy.
right.
I got professional help as well as peer support help. So in 12 step, I got the peer support, and I had such good mentors in 12 step. I was so lucky. I had great mentors in 12 step, but I also I had professional help as well, almost from the very beginning.
Okay. Me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And so you're creating this life, this routine, this your to-do list and purpose every day, um, in recovery. And then how did it begin to merge into a professional calling?
Well,
And
Yeah,
And what were the challenges? What was the ugly stuff then that happened?
yeah. So I lived in Silicon Valley, so I was surrounded by tech my whole life, and it was I grew up kind of poor, so money was really important to me. I thought that money was going to save me. I thought men or money, those two things, one of those two things was going to save me. Um, and it turns out it was love that saved me, but it didn't show up the way I thought it would, but all that to say that I was in sales. I did high tech sales. So I was working for companies like HP and Adobe, and I did a bunch of startups. The Silicon Valley is, fun for startups and really focused on making money. But there was this gnawing sense that this God did not put me on this planet to sell software, right?
Mhm.
And I was out of alignment with my authenticity for a really
Mm,
long time. And I just got to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore.
I
And
get it.
I ended up leaving. I had the best year I ever had in corporate sales over COVID.
I just wanna say something that was your soul calling.
Yeah.
That was your soul saying, "Okay, you have, practical life kind of, you know, in control and you have this routine, but there's something more that Arlena is going to give the world, and you couldn't ignore that anymore." Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, because I would have these experiences when I was, you know, working with women in a 12-step capacity as a peer support person that were magical.
Mhm.
Right? It felt like magic when I was able to share what helped me with somebody else, and you could see it in their eyes that they get it. And there's just like
Human
this
connection.
emotional connection. And that was the high I started chasing.
I
And
see.
I just, I wanted to pay the bills, right? So I, did what I had to do for a while. But this idea, this experience of connecting with women in this healing capacity, um, that felt like it was my calling. And I wanted to do that all the time as much as I could. So that's what really drove me to
Mhm.
leaving the corporate world.
Okay. And then what did you do? How was the podcast born, and how was the group that you have helping women born? And do you realize that by sharing your story and embracing the vulnerability, that it pierced the bubble of these other women and helped them to
Oh, yeah.
put words to their feelings and their own shame? And
That's,
so today, as you interview people about their recovery, how did you get to that point? Did you say, "Okay, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to start this group," but today you do so much to help people in recovery. So can you describe what you're doing today and how you followed that heart calling to offer this to the world, and especially women?
yeah, I'll start with how I started the podcast, which was almost 8 years ago, and I've only been working professionally in this capacity for the last two. But I was going to a meeting, and it was called ODAT, what stands for One Day at a Time, and it was at 6 a.m. And there's something about those early morning meetings that filter out the BS, right? People that show up for that meeting are really very serious about their sobriety, and it met daily. And that was my home group. And there was a gal that I had known for many years, and her name was Gina. And Gina had been suffering from insomnia and from headaches and stuff like that. I was at work one day, and I didn't go to the meeting that morning, but Gina was there at the meeting and had gotten into a car accident on the way to work, and she died 3 hours later. And Gina and I were about the same age. We looked similar. We had a similar background. I have a mom from Mexico City, and my daddy's from Kentucky. And she had a similar, she was also half Hispanic, and, or maybe more than that. But anyway, um, I saw myself in her. And I felt like she died with this dream, with dreams on her heart, right? And
Mm,
I had been wanting to do a sober podcast, but I was afraid because I didn't want my 12-step community. There's some traditions around sharing
sure.
your story, and I wasn't clear on them at first. But
Hmm.
after Gina died, I was like, you know what? This has been a calling on my heart that I can't ignore.
This is bigger. This is
Yeah,
spiritual.
yeah. And so I found a way to do it while still honoring my community. And nobody has ever, given me a hard time about it all this time, 8 years into this. Nobody has ever questioned my motives or what I do. But that's why I started the podcast. And it has opened my eyes and my mind to all different ways that people recover.
Right.
And it's, I've had like 315 episodes, something like that now, 16. And I've just been able to talk to some really amazing people and share these stories of hope of how people, suffered like I did and they were
And
able
it's
to get
so
help.
powerful for someone that, our mind will make us, will cause a belief that AA is such a foreign, scary thing when you haven't yet had exposure to it, or a support group or
Yeah.
church or a yoga class or even a neighbor. And so bringing these stories to someone's, app or phone while they're recovering in the morning from a relapse and look up something and listen to it is building that bridge.
Yeah.
And so in one of your recent podcasts, you were talking to the gentleman named Chandler. I don't remember his last
Yeah. Yeah.
name, about the app he created where people can sign up and go anonymously. And it's even that much more private and safe.
Yeah. It's
And,
called
you
Relay.
know, yeah, I want you to share about that because I didn't, for anybody out there that is buried in fear of reaching out to get help, or their own, you know, terrible mind-made isolation, uh, there are these groups out there where you can connect anonymously,
Yeah.
including Arlina's and Chandler's app. And so can you describe those? And it just blows my mind because my story was on the front newspaper.
Right.
And prior to that, I felt so afraid because I lived a public life to reach out for help. And if I had known that one of these existed, and it would have literally saved an attempt on my own life.
Yeah.
And so I thank you for this work, and please describe. I mean, she has this amazing podcast, but in addition is now providing this group um, that anyone can join. So
Yeah.
please describe that.
Yeah, the app is called Relay, and it's relay.app, and then I think /ODAT. You can get to my group. But it is an anonymous way of connecting with others who are going through the same thing. And it's designed so well because it has the ability to you put some goals and it helps you track your goals, and if you don't reach your goals, then it helps you sort of do like this diagnostic of how were you feeling just before, what were you thinking, and you begin to get some data, you begin to see some, and the thing about data and science coming from this scientific approach is that it's impersonal, like
Mhm.
it sidesteps the whole shame and guilt piece because we're just
Right.
looking at behaviors, right? And we're tracking and getting some data, and it can be done anonymously. And so it helps you feel safe so that you can start building on your progress, and then you're actually connecting with other people so that you
Mhm.
don't so you don't feel alone, right? It gives you hope.
I'll include a link to Arlina's, obviously, the website is in the notes, and if
Yeah.
you anybody wants more info on that, it's wonderful.
Yeah, they did a really good job with the app, and so I decided to partner with them and have been promoting it because there are so many people who just need to be anonymous.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I ask every guest what their favorite song is, and you said that Return to Innocence by Enigma, and that it perfectly described where you were and gave you hope.
Yeah.
So the return to innocence and your true self, I mean, that's really what the song is about.
Yeah, it really is. There is this line, it's like, don't be afraid to be weak and don't be too proud to be strong. And that really, it hit my heart because don't be too proud to be strong. There is strength in that vulnerability. There was strength in admitting my shame and saying it out loud to someone who was safe, right? And then I would receive empathy, right? Brene Brown talks about how empathy is the antidote to shame.
Right.
And when I was brave, it's like I set aside my pride and was able to be vulnerable and honest about my shame. It transmuted that shame. I was met with love and empathy, and it just dissipated. It was amazing.
Is that the sense, or do you have a sense then of a home within you? And if so, can you describe it and what you do every day to
That's a
keep
great
it?
question. That is so good. I do have a sense of home now. And it's so interesting because I had somebody tell me, like a therapist that was like, "Oh, you're in your mind a lot. You have a strong mind. You've developed your mind. But the goal is to drop into your heart and into your body because that's where your compass is. That is where I'm led by. I choose to be led by love and peace now. And I can notice it now when I'm getting too wrapped up and too tight in my head, I go, oh, I can breathe through that and come back to my body, back to my heart, and
Yes.
just follow the joy now.
Every day we have a choice between love, soul, and fear or judgment, our mind. And so that's a beautiful way to end. How Arlina Allen, the work you're doing today is so awesome,
Thank
and
you.
you're nurturing that sense of home within you by choosing love for yourself and sure as heck spreading it out to others all around you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much, Arlina. Please check out all the links to the resources that she offers, and I will probably have her back to continue the discussion.
Yeah. Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye.
You are not alone. If you are dealing with shame and trauma, please reach out to me through my website, nadia-davis.com. You can get a free band shame tip sheet and find out about upcoming events. I'd love it if you picked up my book, Home is Within You, wherever books are sold. If you like this podcast, please tell a friend, leave a review, and make sure to follow me on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Sending warm hugs.